Hi, Simon. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Very well. Happy New Year.
And to you.
Welcome to Collective Thinking Live, and welcome to everyone who's joining us this evening and also on the replay. This is our first Collective Live of 2021, and we find ourselves still in lockdown. How's lockdown 3.0 been for you so far?
Interesting. That's all I can say at this point, but I'm sure I've got more to say later. But it's been okay so far.
It's been okay so far. Well, I'm sure we're going to be talking about it in more detail in the next sort of 30 to 40 minutes. Well, as I say, welcome to everyone. I'm Lisa James, and I'm founder of the Wentworth Collective. We're an event management consultancy, and we design and deliver exceptional experiences for our clients. And we do that through our collective and design thinking, which is where we bring in experts such as yourself to talk about interesting subjects. And we're here today to talk about how we can thrive through lockdown 3.0. And I'm here with Simon Shattock, who's a systemic psychotherapist. And actually, Simon, we've known each other, I think, for nearly 5 years now, do you think?
Yeah. For a long time.
We met at British Military Fitness, where every Saturday morning we get shouted at by someone as we run around, either in the pouring rain or in cold weather conditions. And actually, we started talking about our love of podcasts, and that's when I found out your line of work. And we've been talking about collaborating even before lockdown, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely, for a long time.
Yeah, because of the work that you do with organisations, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I thought we'd start with, you work in social care and mental health, but what is systemic psychotherapy, and how did you get into it?
Oh God, that's a great question, Lisa. And it feels like such a long time ago. I don't really understand why, but I think I initially I've changed fields. So I used to work in the commercial field when I initially started out. I used to work in sales for an advertising company.
Oh, wow.
It was a real big change. And then I just thought I wanted to do something different. So I trained as a social worker because I was really interested in that, and I felt it was a bit more fulfilling. And then I got interested in more working directly with families and organizations through training as a systemic psychotherapist. So rather than just working with one person, it was seeing things through multiple perspectives and maybe working with people in a room and working with other family therapists or systemic psychotherapists. It really enlightened my ideas to how you can get change, not just through one person, but working with a group.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of what led me into it, and it was a really powerful way of working. And when I was training, we used to train where working with a one-way screen.
Okay.
So you'd have the family in front, you'd have your team behind, and the therapist, the team, and your supervisor was helping you in the live moment work with the family whilst you're working with them in the moment, and give you interventions through telephones or telling you to take a break. So it's a very, very powerful way of learning.
So what you're saying is, we say like traditional therapy is normally it's like one-on-one, but here in systemic psychotherapy, you're bringing in other frameworks, other people as part of
Yeah. So it's not just the therapist that is powerful, but the team has an intervention to play with the family as well. So sometimes what they do is something called a reflecting team, where they would bring the team would talk in front of the family to give the family different ideas to walk away with thoughts and perspectives. Whereas if I just come and speak from my position, you only got what Simon thinks as a white man. Whereas if you've got different people with different races, different genders, bring in different perspectives, which adds a richness to the family's perspective of things. So it's the idea of having multiple perspectives on the family situation, rather than just seeing it from one person's perspective.
Yeah. So that's like sort of on the family side. And I know that, again, when we were talking, prior to lockdown about organizations, how does systemic psychotherapy work within organizations?
Yeah, well, I think that's saying that we see things within a system. So a team or a collective of people, whatever the organization is made up of, like a family of lots of people, and it's a system, and sometimes it's working well and all the component departments are functioning together, and sometimes there's difficulties within communication, or there's difficulties within the systems, and it's trying to think that the sum is bigger than the whole of its parts. Right. So that if you've got one thing and it isn't working, that connects to everything else. It all interconnects. And that's the kind of similarities of thinking and ideas.
So it's really interesting. So, bringing back on about what we're going to talk about today, which is essentially, how can we thrive through lockdown as individuals, and how can we thrive through, lockdown as, within or in the working sense, so bringing it back to work, as well as, or in our support networks. And I know that when we were talking, prior to this call, our systems have been removed from, the normal framework.
Totally.
Really interesting in lockdown. So, we've got so much to cover in the next 30 minutes, but starting with that, can you just talk me through, in the context of your work, you mentioned the frameworks that you have in ordinary sort of therapy and how you find to support each other. How does that work in lockdown?
Well, I think that's the thing that I think is interesting, and I don't know how it's affected you personally, and I can talk about me, but I guess we've all been affected in one way or another, whether it be an individual, whether it be in a couple, or even a family, that the institutions or the structures that keep our lives going, like schools, community centres, religious places, sport activities, anything that you do outside of your life are things that keep your life going. When you don't have those things there, you have to rely within the system, the smaller part of the system. So it could be yourself, that could be the couple, it could be the family, and that takes a lot more strength, because in a way all those other structures keep your lives going in normal times. When you don't have that, you've got a lot of challenges to draw upon to make a difference in your life. So you have to really dig deep, because the things that support us every day aren't there anymore. And that's, of course, including your networks and your wider networks, your friends, the people you meet after work for drinks. Those, all the things that maintain us through our everyday life. And the things that we like doing.
And even basic things like going to see your friends, or even, exercise, like, say, for example, with our BMF, exercising. We've had to take that on off.
How does it affect, how did it affect you? What was your sense?
Working in live events, as an industry, we've had to sort of pivot the way that we work, because we're not able to gather in person. So we've had to find, immediately different ways of working. And even for the live events industry as well, just as we take one step forward thinking we might meet in person, or even with small numbers, then suddenly the rules change because of, the pandemic occurring. So, it has affected us. So I think businesses is affected from a working perspective, but also I think for other businesses, for their teams to meet it together and gathering. And we're going to talk about that later on, about how you can engage with people. It's that engagement, it's that human connection that the event industry brings. But we're finding ways, that's what we're doing as a business. How can we engage with audiences when we're apart? Essentially. So, sort of moving on then, as I say, we've got so much to cover. And I want to say to the viewers, if you do have questions, do post them in the comments and we can answer them as we go through. We're talking about, so how do we get through it? What are the sort of tools, and what's the framework, as you were saying before, that we can do to help ourselves through this third lockdown? And I think we said before, I like the analogy of, when you're on a plane and they say that you have to put your oxygen mask on first, look after yourself first.
Yeah.
This is the third time we've been through this pandemic. We can see an end in sight, because hopefully with the vaccine, but talk me through, how can we support ourselves?
I think the most important thing is often, we're all trying to look after other people, whether it be our partners, maybe relatives, elder relatives, children, whoever it is. And I think it's important that we look after what I call self-care. How do we look after ourselves? If we can't look after ourselves, then we can't look after others. So I think it's something about not having too many expectations of ourselves, that we're not going to be running firing on all cylinders all the time, because actually the situation is quite hard. So just being more accepting of yourself, being a bit more compassionate of what's achievable for yourself, and actually doing things that give you self-care, whether going for a walk, doing something nice for yourself, going out and just looking at the leaves outside, having a nice, warm bath or a shower, whatever it is, it gives you comfort. Do those things to make yourself feel better. Relax. What's your favorite tea burger? Don't feel that you've got to be superhuman all the time, because it's just not possible. And I think as long as you accept that, and actually it's okay to look after yourself, then I think when you've got more energy for yourself, then it's easier to look after others, whether it be yourself, your family, or the team that you're working with. So you have to provide that self-care first and foremost.
Yeah. And I know that, you very kindly did 5 tips on World Mental Health Day. And I remember, one of the points that really, really resonated with me was not looking too far in advance.
Yeah. I mean, I think what can happen is, and I've probably talked to you about this before, Lisa, is the idea that we can only control what we can control, not what's out of, not in our sphere of influence. So if we look at, what we can control, well, we can't control the pandemic. We can't control what can happen outside, but we can control, what time we get up in the morning, what we do with the day, that kind of thing. So I think it's focusing on what you can do and looking at one step at a time. Don't think about where the end is. Just look at one day, 1 week ahead. I think if you start to look at it in a more pragmatic way, then we're not almost like sort of anticipating, I'll feel better when we get to the end of it. Just think, well, I'm just going to do this today or this week, and this is what I'm going to work on. But try not to think too far ahead in the future. Otherwise, there could be a sense of disappointment. It hasn't worked out the way that you wanted to. If you start small, then it gives you that sense of what you can achieve within a small sort of context, rather than think, I'll feel better when this is all over kind of position.
Yeah. And what would be your recommendations then of, how to, you mentioned before about, one thing you can control is, what time you wake up in the morning, and, faced with some people are homeschooling, some people have sick relatives, some people are apart from their relatives. How can you process that in your head?
Well, that's the thing, and that's why I say you've got to take one day at a time. You can't control where your relatives are or how you can see your loved ones that you're dearly missing, or the people that you love and care about aren't there. So you can only do what you can do within your moment. So whether it be having a phone call with someone, just reaching out. I think people are zoomed out anyway. So just reaching out and having that phone conversation with a friend. If you can go for that walk, that socially distanced walk, then do that.
Yeah.
So doing things that you can do. And it's okay to acknowledge that times are hard. I think the idea that denying it psychologically is helpful is not always the best position. If you can acknowledge yourself, I'm going to have a bad day sometimes, and that's okay. I think it's better to acknowledge that than to kind of deny that you think you've got to be happy all the time, or you just got to make the best of it, or just get through it. And it's okay to acknowledge that, and also to seek support from others that you feel who give you care and comfort.
Yeah. So from what you're saying to me, it's having realistic expectations, it reframing the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, reframing the situation, accepting that you are going to have bad days, thinking, so not planning too far ahead. And I remember for the World Mental Health Day as well, it's things like doing exercise really is
doing exercise, reframing it to yourself. So just thinking, well, look, it's an opportunity maybe to do something different that you think you've been putting off for a long time. Let's just do it. I am going to do that. Watercolor painting that I said I was going to do, but I've never ever done, and you've got a bit more time to do it. Or I'm going to paint that room that I've been talking about for 10 years that I've been putting off. Well, now it's as good as time as any. So that kind of thing, that you kind of reframe these opportunities to doing things that you've been putting off. Yeah,
but how about those people that are like, you know what, I can't bake banana bread or learn Mandarin or things like that. I think it's accepting as well, isn't it, that even if you don't do anything during the pandemic or do that water painting, that's fine too.
Yeah, like, don't feel like you've got to be, somehow by the end of it, you've got to learn the cello or something. Let's be realistic and say, well, actually, you just want to chill out and watch Netflix. That's okay.
Yeah.
And do what you feel is going to make you feel better and feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? I just don't have realistic expectations, and don't, what I would, the biggest thing to say, don't have higher expectations of yourself than you normally would do.
Yeah. Because I think, again, that's something that we spoke about before, is that there's a lot to do. You know, we haven't got those support networks in place. So if we have the high expectations of what we've got to achieve, but we haven't got the support, the kids aren't going to school, or you're not going to work, or, you know, all those sorts of things that we have in place, that we have on a day-to-day life, have been taken away from us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a teacher, so with my children, you know, I'm not. You know, it's hard, and you're working, and all those things they're gonna be tough.
Yeah. So, I mean, moving on, you know, we've spoken about how we can support ourselves and be kinder to ourselves and have lower expectations. You know, so someone's got a question here from Abby, who says that her comfort and self-care is a coconut latte once a week. How are you finding comfort during lockdown?
Nutella, I think, works for me.
Love it. No, I've been going for a walk every day and getting my latte as well. Just getting some fresh air. Getting up in the morning has been my
I mean, I actually been doing some really nice walks. So as this bit comes, I've really been enjoying that. And actually, one of the things that I kind of noticed is I found areas in my area that I had didn't even know existed, because I'm thinking, okay, this is quite cool, but I've never actually seen this. I've explored things that normally I would just, in a way, taken for granted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then moving on, talking about organizations. So we've spoken about the self. How about organizations? So, you know, if you're an employee or you're an employer, people find it quite stressful. I know I've spoken to some of my clients who have said, you know, even when people were able to go back to work, some people felt quite uncomfortable going back to work. They didn't want to go back into the office. Some people, you know, don't want to go on the tube. They want to carry on working remotely. Although there's some of my clients saying, you know, they know the connection with their fellow employees would benefit said person who might feel anxious. But how can we support each other? Like, how can we get the best out of our teams? And also, certainly, I think, you know, thinking about Zoom calls, when people are on Zoom, they might put their best face on, you know, for that, or work up to that Zoom call and put a smiley face and say everything's fine, when in fact, actually, they might not be feeling as great, or they could be feeling great next week, or we've been doing this for nearly a year now. So a lot to unpack in sort of for this section of the conversation.
I think that,
tell me about how you work with organizations and in the context.
I mean, I think for those people that are, you know, managers or, you know, employers or team leaders or whoever, you know, whatever, you might be managing different departments, I guess you're going to be thinking about, well, how can I get the best out of my employees, but also how am I going to support them through this challenging time? And I guess everyone, to a certain degree, is managing the personal and professional, getting a bit intermerged, you know, in a way that it hadn't been before. So it's kind of thinking about how can you connect in with people. So, you know, in sometimes the team meetings might not be the right context to check in with everyone. So you could have, you know, beginning of the week check-ins, just short ones in a group, more individual ones, like, you know, kind of have 5 minutes to see how you're doing, maybe at the end of the week kind of thing. Those things about keeping people connected all the time is really important, because the the sort of coffee moments and water cooler moments are lost on Zoom. You know, you don't have that little bit of chit chat of just about things, because you just, right, let's stick to the task of what we've got to do, and then we don't have that sort of broader conversations that we do in everyday kind of office contexts. So I think there's something about how you keep the team interconnected with each other so they can support each other, but also giving, I think, as leaders, how can we check in with people? You know?
So how can we do that? What would be your recommendation?
So I'm personally very much into the idea of weekly check-ins, both at the beginning of the week, at the end of the week, both in a group, maybe just a short one if you've got your small team, but also, you know, just quickly at the end of the week, can I have a quick word with you, John, or whoever it is, you know, because I just wanted to see how you're doing, because I noticed you seemed not yourself this week, but I didn't want to say that in front of you know, you could just be very, you know, sort of brief, and not that you want to dive into people's lives, but I guess they might not tell the other people how they're, you know, what they might be struggling with. And again, once you know that there's something going on, it's difficult, then you say, is there anything I can do to support, or what do you need from me? You know, one of the things I've talked to you about is questions, rather than just guess. You might ask questions of people, say, now, I've noticed, you know, that things might be difficult. You know, what do you need from me? If I were to be helpful to you as a manager, what would you notice that I'd be doing that'd be useful to you? And also using what I've talked about before is that appreciation of people's strengths. So I've really noticed that you've done a great piece of work there this week. How have you kept on going? Because I know you've had such a difficult week. So focusing on those questions around strengths and possibilities is so important.
Yeah. So just going on about sort of like talking to your colleagues, say you have those employees though who aren't forthcoming and talking. I know that we spoke about something like the framework in the work that you do, called appreciative inquiry. Talk me through that. Like how can we be more empathetic? And I am thinking about those people who maybe won't speak up, or maybe
Well, I mean, appreciative inquiry is a model that's come from a guy called David Cooper Ryder in the States. It's a really helpful framework, and I guess it's an evidence piece of kind of work and organisational piece of research in terms of working with people to appreciate what they can do rather than look at deficits. And I think you tend to get the best out of people when you're looking at their strengths and what they can do, rather than looking at their deficits of what they can't do. Now, it's okay to get feedback. Obviously, we have to really think about feedback, and feedback is a really key point of, I think, as being good, I guess, what I call systemic inquirer. But if you can appreciate what people can do and focusing on their strengths, then that doesn't take away from the deficits, but you're trying to highlight what they can do. And if you're asking questions about, what made you do that piece of work? I know it was really difficult, but how did you get through it? Rather than saying, I can see that you haven't done X, Y, and Z, it's going to bring the person down. So focusing on what people can do and their abilities and strengths tends to, if you can harness that with people, it can make them feel included, connected, and actually, as a manager, know that what people want from their managers actually is to be recognised. Whilst they might want the bigger paycheck, they also want to be appreciated and recognised by the people who are working for them, because we all like praise.
Yeah. And so give me an example then. For example, if you could give me some kind of example about how we can appreciate how can someone feel when we're apart? How can someone feel appreciated?
Because I think there's small things that you could do.
Yeah.
So, for example, you've noticed someone's done a really great piece of work. You might not do it on a form, but just say, I've noticed that work's coming really quickly. I'm really impressed with what you've done. That's fantastic. And I really, the detail that you work through that, and just send an email saying, really, thanks, really well done. That's been really helpful. I've noticed what that's done to the team, or I've noticed that's really helped when you supported, Joe to do that extra piece of work, which you didn't have to do, because I know you've got a big stuff, a lot on the case. So really, thanks very much. I really appreciate that. So even just small things like an email or a text can make a difference.
Yeah.
Because the way in which we language things has an afterlife.
Okay.
So the way, if I had talked to you now, and the way in which I even start a conversation in a group, in a meeting, or with a colleague, that has an afterlife. So what I say holds power, and the language in what I say has meaning. So the way in which we story our conversations with people, the way in which we narrate what we're talking about, has an afterlife. So if you think about every conversation as an intervention, as a possible, position of change, because I've talked to you previously about questions as interventions.
Yeah.
Then everything that we do can be helpful. So one of the things I think is about getting positive feedback. So if we can look at getting feedback from the people that you're trying to work with, using questions to help get feedback from people that will open up things for them in a way that they might feel otherwise, rather than interpret from, like, if I say, well, Lisa, I think this is going on for you, that's going on for you, that may be right or wrong. But if I ask a question and say, noticed, if I were to kind of think about you and what's been working for you and what's not, what would you say has been helpful in the way that I've been managing you at the moment? What do you need more of, or what do you need less of from me? That invites you to give me feedback about how I'm working with you. Whereas if I say, this is what's going on, that's just my interpretation. And when you get feedback from someone, that creates new information into the system, which makes what I call the difference that makes a difference, which is something that we're interested in systemic psychotherapy, but also in organisational work.
So repeat that again, sorry.
So the difference that makes, so if I ask a question and that changes how you see something or brings out new information creates difference into the system.
Right.
And
Okay.
that's what makes difference into things, into relationship. If I just do the same old thing, nothing changes. If I bring in new information, that creates what I call the difference that makes the difference.
That's right. So, and it's that feedback loop that you were saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what you're saying is, for the, to bring it back to all that thriving in lockdown, rather than telling your employees this is what we're going to do, or being quite, prescriptive, it's actually a discussion and asking questions and going deeper. Actually, Neil Tucson taught me that from Perfect Team. He was on my last thinking. He was like, what else? What else? What else? Because then that feedback loop, and like you're saying, it's a two-way conversation rather than just one way.
Yeah, I'd take that even further to say questions are interventions in what we do and make a difference. Yeah. So the way in which you ask a question will help people think. And there's certain questions that can make people think differently. And if you ask, really nice, what I'd call appreciative inquiry question on a particular question, that will sort of live with someone. And I think, actually, Lisa said that, so that's made me feel good, and I want to do more of that. And I want to I'm going to work harder next week because she said that what I did was really cool, or that will have an afterlife. Whereas if I said, you haven't done this, that, and the other, that would leave you feeling disgruntled.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I do remember, I don't think I've fed this back to you before. I think one of the first more official meetings that we had, actually, you were the last person I saw for a meeting before the first.
Oh, yeah, in the coffee shop.
And we were talking, I always remember you said to me, what would be helpful, for me? And I thought, that's a really interesting way to ask the question, like, how can I be of help for you? Whereas normally that isn't a question that someone would ask me. It's always like, what do you need from me? Or I would tell them what I need. But it wasn't, like, how can the service that I provide be of help to you, and how can we help each other? Just a bit of feedback.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions here. So Cassandra says, I find creative brainstorms, getting great ideas flowing with the team, one of the hardest things to achieve in Zoom land, partly because of what you said, that the task-oriented mentality on Zoom. Any ideas on how to have a better creative output in meetings?
Yeah, one of the things, obviously it's more difficult on Zoom world, but I try to create meetings in which what I call to create an open dialogue. Okay. So that rather than people say, this is what I think, I might say, let's refrain. And I just want you to build on what that last person said. So that creates what I call a multiplicity of different ideas. So if I say something to you and you say, oh God, that makes me think, Lisa, about, I don't know, X, then you say to the next person, what does that connect to you? Rather than people interrupting each other, you're almost like saying, that by using that, it creates a flow of the conversation where people can build on different ideas. So that might be, that's what I've used sometimes in my meetings, the idea of what I call a dialogical conversation. Rather than people just chipping in, I might say, you build on what that's just been said, you build on that. It's what I call a Greek chorus of conversation.
I like that chorus of conversation.
So it's a Greek chorus. So you build on each person's conversation and everyone chips in from what's just been said rather than their own interpretation of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And that creates a multiple systemic perspective. The other thing to think about is something called a reflecting team. So you might ask,
say that again, or
reflecting, yes. Another way would be to have what I call a reflecting conversation. So, for example, if you and I were having a conversation about something, so I would interview you in front of the team on Zoom, and then I would ask the team to say, could you just reflect with each other about what you've just heard, rather than join into the conversation? I just want you guys to reflect on your perspectives of the conversation you just heard, and then you might ask another group to reflect on what they just said. That creates what I call different layers of a systemic perspective.
No, it's really interesting. So you have like this core. I like that. This chorus is building on that appreciative inquiry. It's appreciating the groups. It's about appreciation rather than telling people.
Yeah, but also creates multiple perspectives.
Emma says, my team have a weekly huddle for half an hour, and whoever can make it can drop in. We don't talk about work, and it means different grades of staff get to know each other as people. We've been doing this since before the pandemic, but obviously now these are virtual and are more important than they've ever been. They're not compulsory, but are strongly encouraged. So that's nice, isn't it? And bringing other people in as well.
That's great. That's fantastic.
No, really, really good. So, wrapping up that sort of part of the conversation, I'm keeping an eye on time as well. So as far as supporting each other and thriving in lockdown, from what I'm hearing, what you're saying, it's about supporting our fellow, having an open dialogue, appreciating your fellow colleague, appreciative inquiry. Like if we're going to put a framework and a psychological framework around it in terms of having that questioning technique, what else, how to support you. And I think something that we spoke about before was maybe bringing other people into the conversation as well, as seeing it from other people's point of view.
Yeah, so you could say, I could ask you a question. I'd say, what do you think your manager would say if they were here now about what they thought about this project? Opens up a broader perspective than if I said, what do you think?
Yeah.
So you want to use, so using that to broaden out different perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. I really, really like that. So then sort of going into sort of part 3 of, what we were talking about as well. So if we've spoken about the self, we've spoken about, within organizations, what kinds of toolkit do you think, that people can take away with them, rounding up both of those together? And I think what we've spoken about is how, in uncertain times, people want certainty, and we just don't have that at the moment.
Yeah, one of the frameworks that I think I've mentioned to you is something called Safe Uncertainty by Barry Mason, and it's really something about risk. But I think it's quite a helpful framework because it looks at things within a kind of quadrant. But the main thing is that a lot of the world or organizations want us to be safe and certain, but we live in unsafe uncertainty. And it's not to say that one is better than the other, but I think it's the idea that it's okay that we can't manage all risk, that we have to kind of manage our risk within a certain context. And we can't, safe certainty doesn't exist. It's impossible. We like to think it exists, but it doesn't. So it's okay to be unsafe and uncertain, but we can just acknowledge that we can only manage as much risk as we can. And that's, I think, quite a helpful, I think we've discussed is really helpful framework to think about how we position ourselves. Because, sometimes people want us, I don't know if you've experienced this, people say, I really want to know X, 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 and X, because that will keep this part of your, event safe. But you might say, well, actually, I can only do so much.
Well, again, I'm sorry, we seem to be touching upon other subjects on the other collective thinking series, which is great. Talking to Alan Law, who's my go-to health and safety expert, people want to have risk-free events. Well, certainly before the pandemic, but now it's all about being COVID secure. And, we have a 45-page COVID secure risk assessment which we use at all our events, whether they're, in person, but also, when we have our hybrid events. And we always say we can't remove the risk, but we can minimize it. And what we do, we make sure that we've covered everything and checked every box and, do all that we can, all in our power to minimize the risk. You can't remove risk. It's always going to be there. You can just show how you've assessed it and what you're going to do to minimize it. So that's how we can manage uncertainty.
Yeah.
So, so I suppose from a mental point of view, if you are one of these individuals that want certainty, how can you manage that? What are the tools that you can, or the framework that you can put in place?
Well, I think, that we all want certainty to a certain degree because that's how we live our lives. But it's just to think about going back to the lotus of control. If we can imagine the circle of things that we can control and the things that we can't. We can't control the pandemic. We can't control restrictions we can't control, but we can control when we go for a walk, we can control what dinner we're going to make, we can control, certain things. And I think it's focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't do. And that makes you feel more safe. And if you start to think more and more about the external, that just makes you feel more anxious. Right. So the more you start to think, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't manage this. And everyone's, that if you start to think, well, this is what I can do, this is what is in my control, and this is not in my control, and understanding the difference, I think that's helpful because you can distinguish what you have agency over and what you don't have agency over.
Right. So basically, when you're having those moments, it's like, well, what's in my control? Taking every day as it comes. And, you know, from what you were saying before, just being, as I say, being kind to ourselves, really.
Totally.
Yeah.
You know, don't expect too much. And it's okay, you know, people use different things like, you know, mindfulness, you know, whatever works for you, but just, you know, lowering the expectations that
Yeah.
it's okay not to run on full cylinders.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really good. So I'm just going to see if we've got any other questions. If anyone's got any other questions to ask for Simon, we'll keep that open. But I think it's been really, really interesting. And I think that, you know, the nuggets of information in terms of, just to round up, of, you know, looking after ourselves, being kind to ourselves, lowering our expectations, making sure we go outside in nature, do what we love. If we want to, you know, watch those guilty pleasure programs, or, you know, whatever it is, you know, eat the eye. I'm not going to do that sort of thing, but do what makes us happy, because this is a difficult time.
Yeah.
This is a really difficult time. And then from what you're saying as well, you know, as employers, being appreciative of our employees and creating the space to have those conversations and ask those questions.
Yeah. Because if people don't ask, they don't know, or they don't get asked. Do you know what I mean? So if you don't ask a question, you don't get the response.
No. And is there anything else that you'd like to add, Simon, you know, that we may have not captured, you know, here, or that could help people who are watching, you know?
You know, I just think that just remember that, you know, once you, again, if you can look after yourself, then you're more able to look after others, whether that be your family and your employees or your organizations. So self-care first, and then move to others.
Yeah, that's really, really lovely. That's really lovely. And then if people, I know you're launching your website soon, but if people do want to find out more, or they've got, you know, whether it's on a personal or from an employee level, and they need your support, or to sort of, you know, intervene or something like that, where can they find you, or who can they contact?
Well, I mean, I'm connected in lots of different places, but I guess, obviously, if you run things through Lisa, you can get in touch with me, and that, you know, and hopefully my website will be launched soon, and they can find me directly. But yeah, anything through Lisa initially, and yeah, I'd be happy to take any kind of questions or inquiries if people would like to speak to me.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so much, Simon. I really,
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed the conversation. As I say, we've been talking about it for so long. And what's interesting is that I remember we planned to do it before Christmas, and it was too early. And we said, I wonder if this still will be relevant in the new year. This will just be lockdown 0. So I think the timing couldn't be more perfect. So thank you so much, and look forward to catch up again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa.
Brilliant. Bye.